Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you this afternoon? I'm George Moss, the host of the program called What's Going On here on this network, allpointstv.com. And we are glad to have you out there in the receivership as you are here every Monday, or we would like to have you here every Monday from 2 o'clock to 3. But we have some good news here, and that is that we are here even after the 2 to 3 time period is over, because you can catch us on this network at your convenience. We are delighted to be able to come to you on the first program we're doing in the new year 2015. And we're looking for great things from the studio, and we're looking for great things in terms of the productions that we are bringing to you from the studio, because we are going to be doing some things differently this year. And we are expanding the productions and adding programs all the time, and hope you'll stay with us as we begin to go to another level in the new year here on the 5th of January. And as you navigate with us as we go down the road to another great year, we want to apprise you of the fact that on the second and fourth Mondays, as was the case in 2014, will be followed every second and fourth Mondays by Satori's Black History Corner. And since this is the first Monday of the month, we will have to wait until they arrive next week. And we'll be doing that with bated breath, because they bring a good program every time that they're on the air. But that's true of all the programs here at allpointstv.com. And I hope you will take part in all the programs, and let us know out there in the listenership and the viewership how you think about what we're doing here, and maybe you can make some suggestions of how we can improve the performances. We always like to hear from you, and feel free to make any comment you want to make. Critical acclamants are also desired, and any input you can give us that help us to improve on what we're doing here, we would appreciate it. We're not there yet, but our goal is to be the best network we can be, and we're going to be competing at some point, not necessarily tomorrow, but down the road. Our goal is to be as competitive with the alphabet soup on the cable networks, and that won't be hard to do with some of them, because they're not at the top of their game. But we're trying to improve here, and we think 2015 is going to be a Cadillac year for us, and we're looking forward to the things we are going to be doing here at this network. We are doing some things both downstairs and upstairs, renovating the studio. And you can see here in the background, we have a different appearance than we had in 2013. So this appearance we have right now is something that we introduced in 2014, and we are not finished yet, because we have other things we want to do. So it's going to be very exciting this year. Well, I think we have to start out. I just think that we've got to continue our conversation about this whole narrative that's going on out here, and I think all of it is wrong. This narrative we have going on about race in this country, I don't think we're actually having any conversation that is actually real around the issue of race in this country. I think all of this is upside down. And one of the books I brought to the studio, this book by Larry Elder called "What's Race Got to Do with It?" His subtitle is "Why It's Time to Stop the Stupidest Argument in America." And he's talking about the discussion we're having about race, but I don't think that's where the stupidest argument in America really lies. I think the stupidest argument in America is that we are talking about race, and we're talking about race as the problem, when that is not the problem. The problem is that we have not even, the stupidest thing about it is we have not even begun to talk about what is the basis of the stupidest argument, which is the narrative about race in America. Because this idea that America is racist is that's not the issue. The issue is the narrative about America being a racist country is the problem. In other words, we have not identified the problem, because we identified the problem as racism. But the real problem, which I hope to show this afternoon, is that the real problem is a narrative about racism in America. And I'm going to be doing a radio program. I'm going to be a guest on a radio program on the 19th, which is this month's set aside for the celebration of the birth date of Dr. Martin Luther King, whom, as you know, was born on the 15th of January 1929, and we celebrated that Monday that's closest to that date. And so we'll be celebrating it this year on the 19th. And what I will be saying on that program, I think we're going to be there 2 hours. What I'm going to be saying is that Dr. Martin Luther King has been allowed to slip into that mountaintop that he talked about on April 3rd, 1968, to the point where he has so much been embedded in that mountaintop. He talked about having gone to the mountaintop in that April 3rd, 1968 speech in Memphis, to the point where he has pretty much been made a person of all season, and we've gotten lost of what Dr. King was trying to do. I don't even think we understand the civil rights movement in this country. We talk about it every year, and it has been a subject of conversation on a regular basis in the United States. But I don't get this sense that we really understand what that movement was about. And some of it is because we have been told things about it that are not true. And I think some of it is very deliberate in terms of persons that are using that for personal and profiteering motives that are in place right now. I don't think any of these quote-unquote civil rights leaders have any interest in actually talking about what this movement was about, or if they are, even if they understand it, because they have vested interest in terms of keeping the racial narrative going that America is a racist country, as if that was what the civil rights movement was really aimed to resolve. And I'm going to try to show through our conversation this afternoon that is not what the civil rights movement was trying to accomplish. And I'll get to that when I go back a little bit into history and bring us up to the civil rights movement, which you could say in its modern expression can be probably dated at May the 17th, 1954, with the Brown versus the Board of Education case, named after the suit that was filed in Topeka, Kansas. But really the Brown v. Board case was a court case that involved 5 different court cases in 5 different cities or political arenas. We know about it in Kansas only because Linda Brown's name was the one that was placed upon the suit that had been filed. But there was a claim in Clarendon County, South Carolina, for example, one in Virginia. I think one was even one in Delaware. I think one was even in Washington, D.C. But there were 5 cases altogether, and they were combined into Brown v. Board because Brown would be the first name on the alphabet soup of the claims that were being made, and they just simply converged the cases under one umbrella, one suit with 5 different claims being made about practices in 5 different areas of the country. And so that's how we know the case, but there were 5 of the cases involved in it. And I think we can start a civil rights movement at that point then, when the Supreme Court handed down its ruling on May the 17th, 1954. And I think we have to go and read not only read the conclusion made by the Earl Warren Court when they struck down the Plessy versus Ferguson case that established separate but equal in 1896. I think we have to go back and not only read the ruling of the court, but go and read the transcript that led up to the ruling, because it is clear that we didn't have a real good handle on the argumentation that went on to bring about the Brown ruling, and the role played by the activists on the court that pretty much led the conversation to the ends for which the court itself was seeking, because the court ruling was predetermined even before the arguments were made. And that is very clear if you read the transcript. And I must tell you that on the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board, I was kind of surprised by that myself, because I just assumed some things were true, but it wasn't until I read the transcript that had been that was available that explained what it didn't just explain it; it actually showed the back and forth between the lawyers and the judges as the arguments were being made. It was interesting to look at what was being said by the jurors that were there, as well as by the attorneys that were representing the five plaintiffs. And it was just really surprising to me to look at what the give and take conversation was about there. And what I began to notice was that on the court, there was an activism on the court where there was some, I think you have to say the court was actually guiding the attorneys, basically for the NAACP, were guiding the attorneys to the argument that the court wanted them to make, so that the court could in fact make the judgment that it had made that had nothing to do with the arguments they were making out there. They'd already determined that they were going to have a unanimous verdict so that there would not be any wiggle room for the South to say, well, the court was split. There were 5 here and 4 there, and therefore since the court was split on it, then they would probably have some resistance to following the court. They had to have unanimity, as if to say that the issue was so clear that the court didn't have any doubt about what it should rule in overturning Plessy versus Board of Education, which was the separate but equal ruling.
So you're saying they created a straw man. They basically created this thing basically out of thin air. It didn't have a lot of the attributes of the actual case, and then they attacked that.
Yeah.
And that's that's just bad legal reasoning. It's bad any kind of reasoning.
John, the court had already determined that they were going to strike down Plessy v. Board. And when Vinson died in 1953, the jurors, one of the jurors said that until Vinson, who was the Supreme Court judge, died, he did not believe there was a God. But with Vinson out of the way, with the suit having been filed in 1951, when Vinson was out of the way, now Earl Warren, who was made the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, brought in as a former governor of California, was now appointed to be the Supreme Court judge by Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he came on, and then around his leadership, there was this determination to strike down the Plessy case. And they thought they had the right person to bring that about in Earl Warren. And so they have already determined that they're going to strike it down. What we have when people like Thurgood Marshall and other judges before the Supreme Court, they are there, and the idea that we have is that they actually argued it so profoundly that the court had no other choice than to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson. But that's not true, and you can go read the transcript to find that out for yourself, as I did on the 50th anniversary when I decided to finally read the transcript, which I had not read up to that point. I took everybody's word for it that this is what happened in the court, and that the court was overwhelmed by the arguments of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and their arguments were so tight that the court then rendered a verdict 58 years after Plessy v. Ferguson and struck it down in Brown v. Board. That's not what happened. And the transcript, if you read it as carefully as it should be read, you see that's not what happened. They had activists on that court, and they were making the arguments for these attorneys out there. And when they went off into a tangent, they brought them back to the argument they needed to make. In fact, what they did with the people out there that were representing the NAACP standing out, at the point of where they're standing to address the court, what they did was make a sociological argument. They weren't making a legal argument. They were saying that segregation injured children and inhibited their growth, because by them being segregated, it created a cloud of inferiority in their mind that they would never be able to get rid of for the rest of their lives. Well, that's not a legal argument. That's a sociological argument. And to show you that these were amateurs, which is what they were, they brought in Kenneth Clark, who did the Dow test. Now, this is amateurish stuff here, because if you're going to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson, you got to have a legal argument, and that legal argument must be upon the fact that the the guarantees in the Constitution, for example, found in the 14th Amendment, is that we will have the equal representation before the law. That is, we cannot particularize the law so that it applies here and doesn't apply somewhere else. But they're not making a legal argument before the court. And I think that shows a certain amount of amateurish behavior on the part of the persons out there that's arguing this before the court, that it ought to be struck down. But they're not making a legal argument or a constitutional argument. They're making a sociological argument. And that's why they brought in the psychologist named Kenneth Clark and had him to talk about his findings in what he called the Doll test. And he had gone into Clarendon County, for example. And in Clarendon County, South Carolina, he had asked children to pick out the doll that they found was the pretty doll, for example. And they picked out the white doll. And then he said, and pick out the doll that is a doll that looks like you. And they picked out the black doll. And he used those kinds of questions and the answers that they gave to show that they are in these schools, and these schools are segregated. And you can see here that when they say pick out the pretty doll, they have a skewed concept of themselves because they didn't pick the doll out that look like they look. And that shows you that segregation is damaging these children, and therefore integration would be the thing that fixes that, because by them being segregated, then that injures these children's psychological world, and therefore you have to then make the determination that they are being injured by the segregation, and therefore the 14th Amendment is not actually being followed in terms of equal protection because they're being injured psychologically by the segregation in the South. That is hardly a legal argument, it's a sociological argument. And the court had to bring them to looking at something then would be the legal argument, which is that the 14th Amendment is being violated because the separate and equal is not separate. The separate standard is not an equal standard. That's the argument they have to make. They have to show that the separate standard is not an equal standard. And the court has to bring that argument to bear upon the ruling that it is made. But I want to make it clear that if you read the book called Simple Justice, you'll see that that particular book is arguing that they were out there having meetings and on the golf course, for example, having discussions in conference rooms. They're having discussions before the arguments were made, and they had decided that they're going to strike this. It's going to be struck down. And the amicus curiae had been filed by Dwight Eisenhower's administration that came in as a friend of the plaintiffs, and they were arguing also in their brief that it should be struck down as well. And they had their own interest in doing that. And their interest was to have it struck down because of the Cold War that was taking place and the fact that in 1954 you had Ghana, the first of the African nations below the Sahara, that was getting its independence. And now there's got to be a competition for the colonial movement in Africa is now being pushed back. And which way is Africa going to go? And if we have this racial, this legal problem with segregation in America, then that hurts the outreach into Africa that is now beginning to throw off the shackles of colonialism. And the government has to position itself to be in a position to make the claim that it is in the West where the that Africa can begin to look for some assistance in this post-colonial period. So that's the best interest that the administration has, and it comes in and files a brief there also. But the court wants to strike it down because the court has determined that it is no longer racially. I mean, we know the society is more racially advanced, and so we have to go back and change that. And that's what the court was actually interested in doing for its own reasons. But they had to make the legal argument, and they're making a sociological argument before the court. And they have to position it so the argument would be something that is prohibited by the Constitution. And you have to show that separate is unequal. And that's what the court actually made in this judgment. It said that by the very virtue that is separate, that the equal standard cannot be met. that separate, what Earl Warren said, is separate because it is separate, is unequal. That the very nature of the separation, the fact that it does not have inclusion, the lack of the legal inclusion violates the 14th Amendment because separate cannot be equal. And that is the basis on which they struck that claim down. Well, that's in 54, and then 55 you have the Rosa Parks incident in Montgomery, Alabama. And Rosa Parks is another part of the misunderstanding of the civil rights movement, because Rosa Parks was not sitting in the front of the bus as they are now trying to act like she's sitting behind the bus driver. Rosa Parks was sitting in the quote-unquote the colored section of the bus. And that would be about the 10th seat of the bus in Montgomery. They've taken the signs down in terms of when they began to put an image of what was happening on that bus. When they do the narrative of that now, they take the sign down was on that bus, but there was a sign on that bus, and Rosa Parks was sitting behind that sign. What is happening on that bus on December the 1st when she was arrested was that the bus filled up, and Rosa Parks, who was sitting in the 10th seat on the opposite side of where the bus driver would be in the front. He's on the left side of the bus. She's sitting on the right side of the bus, but they got her sitting behind the bus driver right now because they changed that part of the history as well. But she's sitting in the 10th seat of that bus, right in front of the back door. I don't know. I don't think they have a back door. They don't have back doors on the bus. They don't have a side door on the bus. Buses. They pick the students up now. They don't have on those yellow buses. They don't have a side door, but they have a side bus on the regular buses. Well, she's sitting in the 10th seat, I think, right before the back door, the side door of the bus, and that just you could just simply get out of the chair there, out of your seat, and go to the back door and get out. You don't have to walk back to the front. You're on the front of the bus, and you're walking through what is called what would be the white section of the bus on your way back to the place where the quote-unquote the colored population is in fact sitting, and she's sitting right there by that door. Well, that bus filled up on December the 1st, and now the seat that she's sitting in, which is the colored section, they want her to move back. There are two people on the other side over there, and they're black, because if you have to move, you have to move the persons that are sitting horizontal also, because they're not allowed to sit in the same plane with white passengers on that bus. So all four, there are two people on this side, two on that side, and all four have to get up because they want to accommodate this person standing, and they need that seat. The other two over here get up from the seat when told by the bus driver, whose name was Blake that day, told, I need to have those seats. And he tells them to get up off the seats and move to the back, further to the back of the bus. Well, Rosa Parks is not violating anything by sitting where she's sitting. She's sitting in the colored section of the bus, and she refuses to get up. The person sitting by the window in the seats where she was gets up finally to move. And Rosa Parks moved her feet into the center of the aisle to let him by, and then she slides over to the window where he was, and she's in fact sitting there. And Blake is looking at her through the rearview mirror, and he tells her, make it light on yourself. I need to have that seat. Now, there are two seats over here. But you see, you can't sit horizontal on that bus because then that shows a certain amount of evenness or a certain amount of equality that's in fact implied there. So then, although there are two seats available, these seats have to be confiscated also. And Rosa Parks does not get up. She slides over to the window, and she's still sitting there. And he tells her, make it light on yourself. I need to have that seat. And Rosa Parks does not move. He gets off the bus, goes and calls the get a phone booth. We didn't have all these phones now, so he had to get off the bus, go to a phone booth, make a call, and he called the police. And he tells her, why didn't you? When the police come, they ask her, why didn't you get up? And she says, and her answer was, why do you push us around? And they take her to jail. Well, when they arrested Rosa Parks, they could have arrested her for violating the peace. They could have made that as a basis for having arrested Rosa Parks, but they made a fundamental mistake. They arrested Rosa Parks that day for violating the segregation laws of Alabama. And there's a person down there who is independent of the economic system in Montgomery. His name is E.D. Nixon, and he is a person that is working as a railroad worker who's been influenced by a person by the name of Asa Philip Randolph, who has set up the first black union in the United States in 1925 called the Sleeping Car Porters Union. It's really called the Sleeping Car Porters Union and Maids Union. And he's been under his influence, and he sees an opportunity now. He's been waiting for a test case against the segregation laws in Alabama for a long time, and they now have it. And they have it now in another place than what they had it when Claudette Colvin had been arrested. They had planned to file a case, by the way, to test the segregation laws in Alabama with Claudette Colvin, who was a 15-year-old person that had been arrested. But she was a little bit not the kind of person that they wanted to make a test case with, because she was a little bit on that side, that rough edges side, known to be kind of profane sometimes, using profanity. And I think she was pregnant at that time, and that was another problem. So that would probably cause some issues there. So they backed up on making a claim against segregation with Claudette Colvin. But Rosa Parks was the secretary for the NAACP. She was employed as a seamstress at one of the downtown department stores. And she had an impeccable record in the community and was a friend of a couple there that was in a white couple there. I can't think of the name right now. But she was a friend of that couple, and they could attest to her good standing. And when they arrested her for having violated the segregation laws in that bus that day, December the 1st, 1955, E.D. Nixon saw the opportunity. He said, "We got him now." And on the 5th of December, on the same day that they're now filing, that would be on the following Monday, because they arrested her on a Thursday. On the 5th, the court case is brought up, and Rosa Parks is going to be the test case now of the segregation policies of Alabama, and Dr. King is going to lead a bus boycott of that march. I mean, he's going to start marching to bring about a bus boycott in Montgomery. Now, most people think that the bus boycott is what integrated those buses, and that's not true either. King has gotten the credit for the bus boycott being successful in terms of striking down the segregation laws on those buses in Alabama, but that's not what happened. What happened was that the NAACP filed a claim in court. Now, it's true that the bus boycott is going on for 381 days, and people are not riding that bus, although King didn't think they would stay off the bus, but they did, in fact, stay off that bus. They stayed off that bus 381 days, and they walked to work. And some of the persons were driven to work by the person they worked for. The reason why that bus boycott could not be broken is because some of the whites in Montgomery, Alabama, will go pick their domestics up. You've seen the film called The Help. When they picked them up, and when they couldn't get to work, when they picked them up in their cars and drove them to work. I want you to understand that part, because if you can understand that, you'll understand later on about this movement was not targeting America. It was not targeting America's racism. And I'm going to show that, if I have enough time, about what King was doing. Because as I said when it started out here, this movement is not understood. And we got to get to the point at some point, and I will be doing this for the next 2 weeks when we get to King's birthday, to show that this movement has been hijacked. And I'm going to try to show you how it has been hijacked, but I can write it better than I can say it, because there's so many different components of it. But this movement has been hijacked. And I'm going to show that. If I don't do it this week, I'm going to do it next week. I'm going to continue this for the next 2 weeks anyway. But I'm going to prove this movement's been hijacked by showing what the movement was really about. Because this movement has been sabotaged. And some of it is deliberate, and some of it is just the fact people are clueless about what King was trying to accomplish. Okay, the NAACP takes this issue to court. King is out there leading a bus boycott. But the court ruling comes down, and the court ruling is that the laws, the segregation laws on that bus, cannot be sustained because it is in fact a violation of the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. The court strikes it down. And when they strike it down, then the bus boycott could be ended because of the court claim that has been made. And the court has passed down a judgment that ends it. So it's not the bus boycott that ends it, it's the NAACP. But King gets the credit for it. And that's going to cause all kinds of problems between Dr. King and the SCLC, which is going to be founded later on in 1957, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And King is going to become the titular head of the civil rights movement. But look at what the NAACP has been. They've been established ever since 1909. And here's all of a sudden this Johnny-come-lately person setting up a new civil rights organization and getting all the acclaim when the work is being done by the NAACP. Because the people have been given the narrative that the bus boycott ended the segregation on the buses. The NAACP had accomplished that. And they are angered by the fact that King is getting the credit. There's going to be an argument between Dr. King and the NAACP. It's going to be an argument between the SCLC and the NAACP. And the argument is going to be which one of them is going to head the civil rights movement. In fact, Roy Wilkins is going to ask Dr. King at a certain point, he's going to ask Dr. King, what have you ever integrated? He's actually calling the question of, you're getting all this play out here, but did you actually do that integration of those buses in Montgomery? Did you in fact bring about the integration of the Brown v. Board case, which was in fact not what the NAACP is claiming? It wasn't their arguments that brought about it. It was some other things going on in the court as well. But at least they were the ones in front of the court. But now King is out there in the limelight, and they resent King being out there because they feel they're the ones that's doing the work, and they feel also they are the grandfather and father of the civil rights movement because they're the oldest civil rights organization. They're older than the Urban League. The Urban League was founded in 1910. Why? Because blacks are moving from the south to the north, and we have an urbanized black community being created in such places as Harlem, Baltimore, and other parts of the north, Chicago, where they're going into these northern areas. And because there's a certain kind of Malays that bring in from the south, they need to have an urban league to have an urban policy of those persons that have arrived there. They're set up in 1910. But the NAACP is founded in 1909. And it's founded, and those persons that are saying about the culture being racist and all of that, as if that's what King was trying to do, understand that the NAACP was founded in 1909. It was founded by white socialists. It was not founded by blacks. The blacks had founded the Niagara Conference in 1905, and they founded it in Niagara Falls on the other side of Niagara Falls in Canada because of the influence of the legacy of Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was the black leader, the one everybody's forgotten about. And when the persons found out that this meeting that they're having in 1905 was an anti-Booker T. Washington meeting, they would not let them meet at the hotel there on this side of Niagara Falls. That's why they had to meet in Canada. The meeting is in Canada, and they call it the Niagara Movement because it was found. The movement was headed. The Niagara Movement was held on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls to meet to plan how we're going to challenge the racial discourse that was going on in the country. And that's Du Bois and I think 22 others that met there at that time. Now, they only had one meeting in Niagara Falls. The next meeting they had was at Boston, and they were having it there because of William Lloyd Garrison had set up the Boston had set up the media, the Liberator, which was founded in 1831. They were paying homage to William Lloyd Garrison, the white abolitionist, and they met there the second year, and they would meet in different places from 1905 to 1908. In 1908, you had a race riot that took place in Springfield, Illinois. Now you'd had a riot in Atlanta, Georgia, where Du Bois was, but nobody was too put out about that one because we knew we had a problem in the South around the issue of race because we had not resolved the issue there, basically pushed by the Democratic Party. That's a whole different discussion there as well. But then we knew we had a problem with race in the South. But when they had a race riot in 1908, that took place in Springfield, Illinois. And that is the adopted home of Abraham Lincoln. And we saw a riot in Springfield. It raised the question of how bad is this problem we have in America, because we know we had a problem in the South, but here we got a problem in the backyard in Abraham Lincoln's adopted hometown. Abraham Lincoln was from Kentucky, but he had made his stand in the Lincoln-Douglas debate in 1858, which was 9 different discussions that they had, but only had 7 debates because they had already, both Stephen Douglas and Lincoln had gone to 2 cities already and been there to have a conversation about this campaign they were running. So they didn't go back to those 2 places, Springfield and another place in Illinois. So they had 7 different places they went, and that's where they had the debates. They had 7 different debates in 1858. And it was where Lincoln had made his name known in the debates with Stephen Douglas. And 2 years later, when he runs for president, it is out of Springfield and out of that debate that he is launched on the national stage to run as the first presidential candidate on the Republican Party. They've been founded in Jackson here in Michigan. So when they had a race riot in 1908, it raised the eyebrows of those who were people like Walling, like Mary White Overton, William Lloyd Garrison, William Lloyd Garrison Jr., and some of the others who had a civil rights, you can call it an abolitionist background. And these socialists then came together to set up we got to do something about this problem that we now found is in not only North but in Springfield. So they came together, and they're now going to found the NAACP. It's not founded by blacks. It's founded by white socialists who were energized to do something about the race problem that now see that they got a problem in northern areas as well. And they invite Du Bois, who had founded the Niagara movement, over into that. And Du Bois' job was to set up, and this is what he did. He set up as the person who had graduated from Harvard University, being the first black to come out of Harvard University in 1895, getting a PhD in history. And people need to know that Du Bois started the historical series at Harvard University because he wrote his thesis in 1895 on the suppression of the slave trade. And that manuscript starts the historical series that's still in place at Harvard University. I will make this point as well on the QTN running. If you want to talk about scholarship of those that are graduated from Harvard University, you cannot compare this president to W.E.B. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. There's no comparison, because unbeknownst to most persons who are giving this man too much credit today, Obama is not a scholar. And his understanding of the Constitution is not what persons are saying it is, that this man is a constitutional scholar. There's no evidence that is true. He finished Harvard University also. But when you look at the scholarship, W.E.B. Du Bois comes out of Harvard University in 1895. He's the first black to get a PhD degree from that university. And he is he's preceding 2 other persons there who will make a mark. One of them is William Monroe Trotter, who gets a master's degree from Harvard University. He's going to set up the Boston Guardian in the same place where William Lloyd Garrison was. and look at how many times you're seeing whites in the midst of this movement trying to rectify the problems that blacks are facing. And so this idea that we're talking about the racism of the culture itself, there are specific residues of it, and it has specific applications in certain parts of the country. It's not everywhere.
I bet you in Africa there is a really elite and rigid caste system.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so how often do blacks step over those barriers and try to get this blurring of the edges, social, societal-wise, there? I mean, they speak. I mean, they speak like white people are all plotting to hurt black people or shut them out. And if that's true, I'm 51 years old. I missed every one of my invitations to one of these little secret cabal meetings or something. You know, I mean, I'm really angry that I'm being excluded
John,
for so
White
long.
should be angry. When I get my goal before I get through with this series, I think it'll be 3 weeks, because I want to finish it on the 19th, which will commemorate the 86th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King. What I'm going to be showing here, John, and I don't know if you've seen, John, Stefan Molyneux's latest narrative on race. It's called Racist Until Proven Innocent.
Which we all know is never going to be proven. And once he casts that ballot over you,
The narrative's
you
not
can
gonna,
never escape it.
the narrative's not going to allow it to be proven. Although, and here's a point. There's only one group in America that's racially profiled. Let me tell you what that group is: whites. You see, what you have to understand there, John, is that the only group in America that is racially profiled is whites. The assumption is that all whites are racist.
And that's been becoming more and more since Obama's taken office. That's become the mantra of everybody.
More so under Obama, more so under the direction of this profane man that is the head of the Justice Department, Eric Holder. It's a narrative. I was saying earlier now that you see what we have here is we have the narrative of racism. You see it in Ferguson. You saw it in Trayvon Martin case where they made George Zimmerman white. You see, George Zimmerman is not white. If you can understand why it was necessary to make him white, you can see that we're talking about a narrative here.
White Hispanic, which I have never heard of that classification before that.
It did not. You didn't have a white Hispanic until there was a need to elevate the conversation to white racism. In other words, the narrative was what we were dealing with. That George Zimmerman, you saw the pictures of him. They said he was white at first, but when you saw a picture, you saw a person was Hispanic. So then the narrative had to be changed to be white racist. I mean, not white racist, but white Hispanic. Well, let's look at another situation where it's the same thing. We're talking about the narrative here now. So look at the narrative. When they had Michael Brown had been killed, so then to mitigate against that this is not about race, and we knew the guy was 6'4" and weighed upwards of 290 pounds, what they did was say that he was a gentle giant. That narrative got superseded by the video in the store 13 minutes before he had a confrontation with Darren Wilson, and that narrative got taken out of the public square by the video in the store showing that this quote-unquote gentle giant had assaulted a person in that store and had stolen goods out of the store, so the Gentle Giant narrative had to be taken away.
You know, I like to say this too. Maybe I don't know if you thought of this, and I don't want to interject too much, but the Randy Weaver case. Okay, they depict him as a racist. They depicted him as doing horrific things. He was deserving of his. They've murdered his family, but for what? They did. He didn't do anything that was. I think he cut somebody's shotgun down, which is legal to do. You got to be within a certain range, and he was maybe off a quarter of an inch from where they would estimate what the barrel length should have been. And that's where the reason of the raid was.
Yeah.
His whole family got murdered, basically. But, you know, he's a racist a-hole, but this guy's a gentle giant. And he obviously did more. He did more on camera than Randy Weaver ever did that could prove of anything.
Yeah.
And, I mean, but Randy Weaver's this racist a-hole, deserved his family killed by the FBI. But, hey, you know, this gentle giant was such a great man, you know.
John, the narrative is what we're not looking at what the real problem is that we're focusing on. We have a narrative of racism. Michael Brown was not. Eric Holder went to Ebenezer Baptist Church in the height of the Ferguson issue, where everybody's now they're now focusing on Ferguson because of the Michael Brown incident with Darren Wilson. He goes there and he says to the people at Ebenezer Baptist Church, standing in the pulpit where Martin Luther King was, to make a connection that this is more civil rights work that got to be done, because now the issue is racial profiling. But was there racial profiling in the Michael Brown case? And Eric Holder, let me say this to you. If you're going to end quote-unquote racial profiling, what are you talking about there? The assumption is that when you say racial profiling, you're saying that the profiling is done by whites. Whites are the target of racial profiling. I'm going to prove that over the course of these 3 weeks, but I can say right now that the only group in this country that's racially profiled is whites in this country. Now, people are going to object to that. And I'm going to meet your objection by saying that when a person is walking down the street and has got his pants on the ground, and you profile that person, that is not racial profiling, that's individual profiling by the presentation of that person. And in fact, I will ask you this question. What is the profile of black folks as a race? A race that has in it Jesse Jackson on the one hand, and Al Sharpton over there with him, and some of the other race merchants. On the other hand, there's Clarence Thomas, there's Thomas Sowell, Dr. Ben Carson, Allen West, and others. What's the profile of the black race? You see, that's not a race profiling that's taking place. There's individual profiling that's going on. What you have here really is that when you say that America is a racist country, hold on. When you say America is a racist country, are you saying the Arabs are racist? Have you ever heard that claim being made? No, you haven't. Okay, let's keep going down that line then. What about blacks? Has anyone made the case that when you talk about America being a racist country, anybody made a claim that black folks are driving the racism in the country? That is not being made. No one's made that. Hispanics, what about that group? Nobody. So when they say America is a racist country, they're saying white people are racist. That's racial profiling. And that is the only racial profiling that is going on in this country. We got a narrative here. And your narrative is that racial profiling is what happened to Michael Brown.
Look at the guy who ran for governor in California, Bustamante. He belonged to La Raza, the race.
The race.
The race. That's a Hispanic organization which is basically sees themselves as a separate race and is very racist in their intentions of taking over the country.
John, I'm telling you, I'm trying to get to the point here. Look, there would have been a time for persons to be elected to Congress and go in and set up a counter group called the Congressional Black Caucus. You know when that would be? Back in the time of Woodrow Wilson, when they had Wilson coming in and setting up different bathrooms for members of the House of Representatives, because they elected a black person from Chicago to be a member of the House, and so he's got a different place he has to go to than the others would go to. But why is the Congressional Black Caucus setting up a group called the Congressional Black Caucus in the Congress? And why? Wait. This is much. I'm all by. I got to close my book now.
The point I was trying to make, though, is like La Raza wasn't even talked about. They never talked about his connection to the typical mainstream press didn't pick up on it. The right wing, the radicals, Fox News or whatever, they're the ones that mentioned it. You wouldn't even hear it. I mean, that was a serious connection for him, but it was just totally underneath the carpet.
John, let's look at what's happening here. You see, I'm the only one saying this because no one else has really looked at all aspects of what's going on here. We got to have a different narrative here. The narrative is wrong. Let me give an example of that. Do you think that people are coming to this country, people of color coming to this country, are coming here because they are too far removed that they can't see the racism this country has? So what they're doing here is coming to the country to get closer to the racism. Does that make any sense? That people are getting on rafts to come into the country. These people of color now. There are people from Africa coming here, people from Cuba coming here, blacks coming from other parts of the world and coming here. Is it because they want to get closer to the racism that this country has? How much sense would that make? That they're coming into. What you have here, quite frankly, in America, is that America is the only country that has tried to, in fact, punish itself for the sins of the past. No other country has set in motion, no other Western country certainly has set in motion affirmative action in order to compensate for what was considered to be restrictions based upon the segregation's past, Jim Crow in the South, and things like that, where people were willing to set a prohibition against their own performance to prohibit themselves and give advantages to another group. And they want to call that group racist, who is trying to make up for the condition. When have you seen that anywhere? Let me read this to you to make that point even more profound. Here's what is in the book written by Larry Elder, 10 Things You Can't Say in America. You better not say what's in chapter 1, which is that black folks in America are more racist than whites. And that is absolutely true. I'm not going to be very popular in saying that. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do on this network and in my post. I'm going to absolutely be truthful. And I don't care what you say about it. Some of y'all get on my wall, and you know what? I don't take any accusations. What I do is make an accusation of my own. I had this one loon get on my wall and on my Facebook post. And when you get on my wall, what I do is I don't defend what you say. I make my own accusation about what you are, because I understand what's going on. I understand it better than you, and I understand it probably better than most persons in this country. Let me read this to you right here from the book called The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. The first chapter in this book is called Blacks Are More Racist Than Whites, and that's absolutely true. You can see that in terms of they are constantly, all they do is talk about race. I mean, why don't we see that the real racists in America are the race baiters? Let me read this right here to you. Black Harvard sociologist Orlando Patterson said, quote, "The sociological truths are that America, while still flawed in its race relations, because there's no country going to be perfect, so all nations are flawed, and all countries have racism in their countries." And I'll talk about why America's only one single out. We'll talk about that as well, hopefully before we get off the air today. The sociological truths are that America, while still flawed in its race relations, is now the least racist white majority society in the world, has a better record of legal protection of minorities than any other society, white or black, offers more opportunities to a greater number of black persons than any other society, including all those of Africa. The editor of the National Review, John O. Solomon, put it this way: white racism exists. He could have also said black racism exists, or he could have added that to it, or Hispanic racism exists, or Chinese racism exists, or Arab racism exists. In fact, I was in a seminar at the university, and they had Nawal El-Saadawi from Egypt as the presenter in a 5-day, I think it was a 2-week workshop that was there, and I read her novels. And I asked her, I said, I'm reading your novels, some of them written in the more distant past, and I'm noticing a strand of racialism in your discourse. And she told me this in Rush. She said, "You're quite right." She's now come away from that, but she said, "But Arab culture is very racist." Those are her words. And anyone that doubts that, go and look what they're doing in Africa. Go look in Sudan and see what it's doing there. Go into Mauritania and see what it's doing there, what it's doing in Morocco. The reason you make no claim against that racism is because there's no moral claim you can make, because they're not going to respond to the claim. It's only in the West that they respond to the claim. I brought documents, so I don't have to guess here. Let me read page 105 of this book. This is a book called Africa Unchained. This is why people out there do not get on my the scholars don't get on my posts. They know I'm out there. They better not get on the post. Let me read this to you on page 105, the book called Africa Unchained, written by a Ghanaian writer named George Yete. George Yete has 4 major works out. This is probably the most profound of the 4 works that he has out. Here's another book out called Indigenous African Institution. That's also a major work. A book called African Chaos, which is a major work as well. But this is a major work right here. The other one is called Africa Betrayal. Africa Betrayed. This one is called Africa Unchained. And he says on page 105 of this book, while the Europeans organized the West African slave trade, the Arabs managed the East African and Trans-Saharan counterparts. So we have the Western slave trade, but this is the Eastern slave trade we don't talk about, organized by the East African and Trans-Saharan counterparts. This is the Arab slave trade. He says over 20 million black slaves were shipped from East Africa to Arabia. Enslaving and slave trading in East Africa were peculiarly savage, and a traffic notable for its barbarity. What is Ayete saying here? He's saying that the slave trade was horrific, but in a trade that was horrific, it is peculiarly horrific in the Eastern slave trade. And that goes along with what's on page 93 of the book written by Brigitte Gabriel called They Must Be Stopped, where she says there, why is there no black culture in the eastern part of the world, of the Middle East, in the Arab world? Since he's saying they took 20 million Africans over there, where is there no African culture over there? Well, here's why. Enslaving and slave trading in East Africa were peculiarly savage and a traffic notable for its barbarity. Villages were razed, the unfit villages massacred. The enslaved were yoked together, several hundred in a caravan on their long journey to the coast, East Coast. It is estimated that only 1 in 5 of those captured in the interior reached Zanzibar. Some historians believe the slave trade was more catastrophic in East Africa than in West Africa, which you're not talking about. And how many persons here are talking about that there's a slave trade still going on in the world right now, and there's a slave trade run by Arabs, which no one talks about. And the reason you don't talk about it is because you know that there's no moral appeal you can make in the Arab world. They make a moral appeal here, and that right there just makes a disclaimer about your accusation that this country here is saturated with racism. In fact, your particularization of the things that happened into Ferguson and in New York and turning cases that were not racist into racist cases is another argument against your accusation, because racism wasn't in either one of those cases. Those men were violating the law. And in fact that you're on it. See, when I ask you this question here, and I ask you, okay, when do you think Michael Brown case would have occurred? And when do you think that Eric Garner's case would have occurred? And I'll give you the dates of it. And you tell me why you're still talking about it 4 and 5 months later. In the Eric Garner case, it was July the 16th of last year. July 16th, 2014. We're in a different year right now. And the Michael Brown case was August the 9th. This is 2015. And everybody around the nation is pointing to Ferguson and New York. In Los Angeles, they're doing it. And they got their hands up, don't shoot. In Los Angeles. On the basketball court in Cleveland, you had LeBron James, hands up. He was saying, I can't breathe, about New York. He's in Cleveland. Why isn't he dealing with that which is in Cleveland? He's not rampant. What you have here is a narrative. And I'll finish this up when we get more time next week, because we're not through with this conversation yet. We've got to finish up some things here. Because until America gets the narrative straight, we can't straighten the problem out. And there are people out there who have dark interests who don't want us to get this narrative straight because they want this friction. And that's Obama as well and Holder. Want this friction to continue this barrage that's going on because they don't want this country unified. And we'll talk about that as well. Okay, we're not finished yet. We'll do it next week, and we'll finish this on King's birthday on the 19th. Until that time and until next week, I want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.